was many times that I shouldn't have made it out alive. And I look back on it now and I can't believe that I still blame myself, and I have a hard time not blaming myself.
Powerful words tonight from a survivor of sex trafficking and an advocate for Indigenous families.
She is sharing her story as Minnesota gains momentum in its fight against the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous people. Here's Fox 9 investigator Nathan O'Neill.
We begin not in a big city, but in this unsuspecting neighborhood in Cloquet, Minnesota. Among the 12,000 people living here, we find Jessica Gidagaakoons Smith. She's a tribal member of the Boys Fort Band of Chippewa, and spiritually, she calls herself a warrior.
I'm a survivor of human trafficking. That time in my life completely broke me. It broke my spirit. It broke everything inside of me.
Jessica's story is difficult to hear. She was 24. Her father had just died. She was drinking a lot and vulnerable when her trafficker found her online.
At the time was talking with a man on Facebook, and we had conversations, and we were, in my eyes, I thought we were building a relationship. And this happened, which we call grooming, for about 6 months.
Jessica's trafficker convinced her to travel to Las Vegas under false promises about modeling.
Even though I didn't want him to control me, he did have control over me. It was the most terrifying time in my life.
For 4 months, and under the influence of alcohol, Jessica tells us she was forced to work the Las Vegas Strip. In the shadows, beyond the neon lights, she was abused.
I got held in a room for 5 days, and this is in the Las Vegas heat, so it was 115 degrees outside, no air conditioning in that room. I had my phone and everything taken away, so I didn't have any contact with family. And in that time period, I was starved, I was severely beaten, I had my head smashed up a wall so many times that I literally could not open my mouth. And when I look back on it now, I realize that that is when my voice was silenced, because I literally could not open my mouth.
In Minnesota, sex trafficking disproportionately affects Native Americans. According to a state task force report, in 2017, 173 sex trafficking incidents were reported by law enforcement. 20% of all the victims were Native American, even though the group makes up only 1% of the state's entire population.
Sex trafficking has been a huge problem.
Nicole Matthews is executive director of the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. The group commissioned this Garden of Truth report, interviewing more than 100 Indigenous trafficking survivors, revealing gut-wrenching testimony.
One of the women told a story about a sex buyer who said to her, "I thought we killed all of you." So I think, we learned a lot from that report about the connection to missing and murdered, the risk factors, and the exploitation of our people.
Jessica considers herself lucky she managed to escape her trafficker. What happened to him?
I don't know. It's when I got home I stopped. I didn't talk to him. I never went to court. I never would. The justice system is not safe for trafficking survivors, so very few of them seek justice because of the fear of them being retaliated against or re-traumatized by having to testify and things like that. So it's very rare that people actually report trafficking.
Why do you think that is?
Fear. I think fear and probably a little bit of shame.
There's also the added risk of criminal prosecution depending on where you live. For example, in Minnesota, the Safe Harbor law does provide legal immunity to trafficking victims who are 24 years old and younger, protecting them from being criminally charged with prostitution. But neighboring states, including North and South Dakota, Wisconsin, and Iowa, have no such protections. Even so, in Minnesota, advocates want to expand the Safe Harbor law even further.
So they need to extend the trafficking safe harbor laws to protect people that are older too, because it doesn't only happen to children.
Jessica now works as a legal and cultural advocate, providing support to victims with similar experiences.
The families that have missing or murdered loved ones don't have good cultural legal representation, and oftentimes the court systems are very re-traumatizing in themselves. So it's important for me to bring that culture aspect into the courtroom in any way that I can.
Lending her voice to those who've been silenced.
It's crucial for people to know that this is actually really happening. So if that means that I have to rehash my own trauma every single day in order to save one person, I will do that.
Minnesota's task force report, which was released 2 years ago, also recommends expanding the safe harbor law to include trafficking survivors of all ages. That will be up to lawmakers to make that change, but so far we are not aware of any legislative efforts to do so. For the Fox 9 investigators, I'm Nathan O'Neill.